Sumbar Rabki number is one of Dungil Rabdu Kiwi, Nuba di Gukangla Yu Jenas. Zawa, Tichir, Sidu Guin, Kangichir, Minam Yugi Cabernet, Yongzin Tetop Sambeches.
The third aspect, which is strong production, and the root verse starts by saying, this is what, so one may wonder what kind of cause has the ability to lead to the strong production of suffering. This is why craving for existence is the cause. The variety of things humans attain are brought about by the thought to obtain them.
Deba, Nyelengi Pumbo, Gume the Midumbi Gu Wanshu Tabasoli, Gawa Mena, Di Gu Kain Shena, Siba Ngomberdube Seba, Nyelengi Pumbu Guinde, Minam Kewe Nisu Jubi Yugi Cabernet, Te Topdegi Yongzin Sambechebi H's.
And the commentary is, if the aggregates do not arise, so it's appropriated aggregates here as well, if the appropriated aggregates do not arise without causes, nor from discordant causes, nor from discordant causes such as a permanent Ishvara and so on, what then are their causes? Craving for existence is the cause of the aggregates because the varieties of things that are the places human beings are born in are brought about by the thought to obtain them.
Tatanda de Wazu Nyelengi Pumbu Shibi Jelaya Laryang. Ani Nyelengi Pumbu Sawa di condition lengu yores. Say you do that di Gumele lengi yomare. Ani Tagbi Gu Wanshu Sole Kiki yomare. Ta Karigi Chigi yores. Lamna Pumbu Nea di Sebagi Chigi yores. Ta Chidang Sebagi Chigi yores.
So the crux of this point here is that if the aggregates do not arise from discordant causes, nor do they arise without, so first they do not arise without causes, and they do not arise from causes such as permanent Ishvara, which are discordant causes, then what are the causes of these aggregates? And in response, Acharya Dharmakirti is saying, craving, the cause for the aggregates that we have, is craving.
Ta Sebatella Dose Jise Sise and Sum Yobenane, Tanda Zawa Tangudigi Kabla, and Sibangomber Dube Seba di Gures, Sidu said. Seba Sumginane, Sibangomber Dube Seba di, and Koa Punku Pumbulingi Gutires.
So generally when one talks of craving, there are three kinds of craving that are mentioned. One, I think it's translated as craving for existence. Another one is craving for pleasure. And then a third one, which is, I think it's translated as craving for annihilation. There's these three kinds of craving. But here, in relation to what is being said in this portion of the text, the craving for existence here is, of these three, the one that is being described as the cause for the aggregates being taken.
Tatanda Zawa Nalola, Tindegi Sidu di Pumbulembi Guyimbi Gumzen Carreras Lava Inas. Minam Yugi Cabani Yongzin Tedu Sambeche says that under Garanso, Kibunamgi, you can't any Lenga Drobaina, you can't lapa Juk Drobaina, did you Gudi Carresena, you te Tunigi Dumba. You do number to be Sebadigi and you tell Jukjukures.
So, in explaining how this craving for existence is the cause, it says it's an existence for the cause. So, craving for existence is the cause of taking the appropriated aggregates because the varieties of things that humans attain are brought about by the thought to obtain them. So, whatever one has is preceded by the thought or the wish to attain it. And that's why craving for existence here is being explained as the cause for the appropriated aggregates.
So that Tende Yala Jungi Mason Yondu, Ani Geba Seba, Guba Lemba Sije, Ni Yawa Cheche, Yinju, Niga Seba Yimba Chikwache. That Chigdi, geba seba keje she yundu ani yu theda thela ani thomde gi seba de she yu theda thela chabe chagba de she ani lemba de gi dinde gi seba de kongdu pel yundu ani yu de lemba le jugdu yorwa yu de lemba le jugdu yoba yindu ani lemba se mingtar seba de kongdu pel yundu lemba se mingtar.
So in the 12 links, the 8th one is called craving, and the 9th is grasping. Is that how we do it? Craving and grasping. Yeah. And both this 8th and the 9th, even though they're called craving and grasping, both of them are forms of craving. The difference between the 8th and the 9th is that when this craving becomes stronger, then it becomes the 9th one, which is then what makes you grasp onto things or obtain things, so want to take them. And so then that grasping is a heightened form of craving, where it has come to the point which is then going to act as the impulse to actually go out and obtain things.
Ta dipena ngazu mol chimbe inata mol chin chonga mangbu shubu yorwa ta chonga mangbu yobe yindu gala chonga kawala takanda chonga nang dolo chonga jin zubi inata 당보 다 돌로 카리 렘발 주기이나 디 렘발 마죽 응원 텔라 카리요레 돌로 텔라 세베 슈 타오치게 거와 디 세베 슈 첨부 펠 용도 다디 ngala inji mi gugudu sejan le go zamdu de nga zun yogo wa o di indi betina shin sheje ta tando 돌로 ge chapda budi nga zu phungbu ti she korbe phungbu sabat she ta kandar phungbu nibani chi pyeje phungbu sawa lengudu phungbu 돌로 ge chudra budi she 대풍부 텔라 차비 착과 대게 아니 공도 배용도 아니 풍부들 렘발로 주고 해야 돼.
So for example, when you go to the mall and you have all of these different kinds of shops, when you walk into a shop where you want to buy clothes and you have all of these different kinds of clothes, the fact that one reaches out to a certain kind of clothing or a certain article as compared to another one is because before one actually goes and buys it, it's preceded by a craving for that kind of, or that particular design or whatever it might be. And then when this becomes strong, and then this then becomes the impulse to actually go and pick that thing up. So similarly, comparable to the clothes or analogous to the clothes, when one has this kind of craving, the thing that the craving is directed to are the aggregates. And so when you have this craving that is directed to the aggregates, when it becomes stronger, the craving then becomes a cause for wanting to obtain them or actually engaging in things to attain those aggregates.
아니 시방 오버도 세바스타 디 딘지 차과될 시발 디 시드레스 다 자와치마디 테니 시드스 강치리 양스 소차 디두 토바다 도르드 주바 대단히 되다 직세 임버데스.
So this craving for the aggregates, this craving for the aggregates, craving is how it's translated in English, right? Commonly, is it craving? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, but just to distinguish it as that 8th link, we use craving, right? Okay. So then craving for existence here is craving for those aggregates. So when you're trying to describe what craving for existence is, this is craving for the aggregates. Which is why then in the next verse it says, because that is craving for existence, along with which the desire to obtain happiness and abandon suffering, are then these other two are asserted as craving for pleasure and craving for annihilation.
Ta sise dela sise munjin shedan dela chungomba wanamgi deba sise ni chungomba wanamgi 풍부 유인 체발라 착베 세발라 셰이기만스 드르니스도 단다 세만남지 리우니바 디갑라 반지 추라기 드르니 끼니기 유튼두니베 세발라 셰바인스
케디 균 체바스는 균 체알라 차버르베
아
체발라 차버르베
풍부 유인 체르도 풍부 유인 마체버드베 차과죠 봐
알레
풍부 디치 디스
균 마체바 인사라게 로스
풍부디도 미제바 되었어. 풍부디 유미셰버 되었어. 세베.
Yes. I've made a mistake in the translation here in the text. Just pay attention to where the error is. Even though, so generally this craving for existence, when it's described, the craving for existence is described according to the followers of Abhidharma. So the Abhidharmikas, they describe craving as craving that does not want the end of the aggregates. Here I've written towards the end of the aggregates. Here it should be craving that does not want an end to the continuum of the aggregates. So it's a craving that wishes not for the continuum of the aggregates not to end. It's opposite of what you find over here. Here, however, and when it says here refers to the second chapter of the Pramanavartika. So different from how the Abhidharmika speak of it and different from how Acharya Dharmakirti is speaking of it. Here it is described as craving that is the wish for the places of birth.
So the 당아서 시에게 참나 내용들다. 또 치포에 참나 내용들 지름 구조용들 아니 다 시에게 따데 풍부다다 지가서 치다서로 되는 것도 교용들 당아 시루도 사바 소소 소 용소로 깨베 카도 될라 당봉아조를 착과 가리요래 착바디 풍부되다 미제와 되봐 풍부디 규미 제벌도 세바치기 그랬어. 와 어디 세바레스 다 충고모는 세바테레스.
So what the Abhidharmikas here are talking about as craving for existence is they're talking about it as when signs arise or when one starts to see certain signs that suggest that one's life is coming to an end or that death is imminent, at that point there is a form of craving that arises that wishes for that not to happen. So the wish for not wanting the aggregates to end or the wish for there being no end to the continuation of the aggregates is what the Abhidharmikas are calling the craving for existence over here.
다 풍부 규미체버도 세바 찍처와 다 풍부 규미체버도 세바 여 풍부 규미체버도 세바 깨깨버체 다 디테다 규미체버도 세바 깨와도 마세 다 풍부디다 다 쟁에수 하람 타 충에도 줄로 타 충에도 내용도 아니 풍부 서버직 내게 되고 사와시게 그랬어 어디 기내 두는 일 세바스
And then when this kind of wish or this craving for not wanting the other aggregates to end, as that intensifies, but then you come to a point where one notices that there is an inevitability that there is going to be death and that it's too close now. At that point there is a new craving, which is the one that's mentioned over here as the craving that is the wish for the places of birth, which basically means a craving for some new aggregates, so the wish to take on new aggregates that arises at that point.
Bena 먼저 당보 걸로 사바지 뉘 텔라 착심 춘보 여바이다 카디 있는 테다 미체버도 걸로디 카디는 컨데시 nga딜 가부 슈유에서 테다 미체버도 세바시키기로 와 어디 중공법이 지시게 시시소적치 딱 걸로디 가감지는 닝버 차도 되가나 양 걸로 사와지 랭게 사무시 코르기로 와 어디 단다 갑들시에 시시세 지시디시.
So for instance the Abhidharmikas here are talking about craving for existence. They're describing it as the wish for not wanting to be separated from the continuum of the aggregates or not wanting the continuation of the aggregates to end, which is another way of saying they want them to continue. And comparable to that, you can have, for instance, if you've got a really nice piece of clothing or you have really nice clothes, then there is a wish for those clothes to always have that, to keep wearing that or keep having that. And then over here, however, in the Pramanavartika, where it's talking about craving for existence, it's saying here this craving for existence is comparable more to when you see that this clothing, this article of clothing is now going to, it's kind of nearing its end, then you wish for a new one and you wish for another one that can then replace this and carry on. So that's what over here is being mentioned as the craving for existence, which is the craving for the wish for the places of birth.
이제 so didn't kene you to new sebal sheva inche. That kene lembi gutela, and seba teachable rivers, kene lembi gutela, kene lembi gutela, sisi dichibu rivers lana, sisi dichibu mare, teda nyamdo, dewa tomdo ki seba, dunga tondo ki seba yang, and kene de lembi gula to gula yores.
But then, is this like the causes for grasping at the places of birth? So when you take birth, or when you take birth in a given place, is this craving for or this grasping at that place sufficient as a cause? And it says, no, that's not the only cause. So the next part, the causes for grasping at the places of birth is not the only cause, or is not only such a craving, but the craving that wishes to obtain happiness and the craving that wishes to abandon suffering are also asserted as the causes for grasping at different places of birth.
That digi karisego lana kewa lenge pungbu lenge dirwa pungbu sawa lenge da kurwe pungbu kene saba lenge di kene saba lenge ta ngög gyusura ta ngög gyusura wati siseche ta sisegi gyabdela sisegi di ngaro dela ani gyukari yore dewa thomde da dunge dondo gi sebati yore ta sebati bani di shedurta.
So what's being said here is like the direct cause for taking birth in a certain place is this craving, that is the wish for the places of birth. That's like the immediate cause. And behind that, so behind this actual act of taking birth, the cause which is immediately the direct cause of that, which is craving for the wish or wishing for those places of birth, behind that there is this wish to attain happiness and the wish to be freed from suffering. So there's these two levels of craving. One is the immediate one, and then behind that there are these two kinds of craving, which are attaining happiness and abandoning suffering. So kind of like a direct cause and an indirect cause.
카두 텔라 아니 돌로 텔라 차제 대퇴니기 둠바디 디차디 그러와 이나양 파기 톰바도 돌로녀가 레기 균nguyên 텔라 가리요래 수수샤네 마 퇴기 규델라 수수 규델라 대와 톰데도 눈엔 동도기 세바지 여러와 대와 톰도기 세바지 여러와 디기 겐셰제 파기 톰바도 티두와 딱 카두 파기 레셰 카두 돌로네 돌로 사바 디디 디시샤와 녀에디 카두 돌로 텔라 텔라 제 차바디 지그러와 So
for example, when you go to buy clothes, the immediate cause that makes you pick out one verse over another, the immediate cause is an attachment that is directed to that. So the wish for that thing, that's the immediate cause. But what made one leave home and move to that place is a preceding cause, which then led to one being there and have immediate craving for that object. But behind that, there was the wish for attaining happiness and the wish to be freed from suffering, which was the driving force that led one to leave and get there and then have that immediate craving directed at the thing.
Shengi wangmedu guyo mare, soso rangi seba shikeche, pungbu dila seba shikeche, tada nga zu lenshebi pungbu dila seba shikeche, nga zu dina zugyo re, stadi she dom dirta.
So the kind of summary, to summarize what's being said, it's saying that whenever one takes birth, the cause that makes one take birth is this craving that one has in one's own mind and in one's own previous continuum. And when there is this kind of craving, then at the time that one is on the way out, then that acts as the cause for taking on aggregates once again.
Tadindi seba di mabang chinje la ngazu pungbu lenle ba degirta. Pungbu di pyoje che pungbu di ningba sha nimaji seru di yang pungbu sawaji yang lingiri. Kaisi seba di yobe ringtela yang sawaji lingiri. Yang di sesona yang sawaji lingiri. Yang di sesona sawaji lingiri. Kanda ta seba di masege pardo So
what is there for the end, kind of what's being said is, as long as you have this kind of craving, then there will be no end to continuously taking birth, because as long as you have craving, when one life starts coming towards an end, then as long as the craving is there, that's going to act as a propelling factor for then taking on another birth. And then when that comes to an end, it will lead to taking on another one. And because this is going to go on indefinitely, as long as there is craving, there will always be, at the end of each birth, there will be another craving that then connects it to a subsequent birth. So that goes on.
다 디 풍부 렘바 디페 디나신 체제 다도 디 단다 슝고르와 다 디나신 체제 다 가란수 깨니 무시기 바도 가란수 차와칸디 지글다 차와칸디 지 좀바도 주바도 렘바도 소바 카리 치기 요바이나 디 창막이 규디 소수귤라 요데 세바테레 스타디시기다.
And apart from that fact of it being also the reason why it carries on from life to life, even during the course of one's life, whatever one wishes for or whatever one desires and whatever one takes, whatever things we accumulate, it's also, this craving is also the cause for that accumulation that we do, or what we find as our constant action of trying to take things and own things and have things.
다 디 랍기르체 다 시바경이 남바니스 자와 다도 차비 균일레 데민 데워 되셰베 꾼라 랍도 죽규르와 디실 세바 시딘스.
So that was the third aspect. Then there's the fourth aspect, which is condition, and the fourth aspect, the verse is, from the cause that is attachment to a self, not pleasurable is regarded as pleasurable, and one engages in all, therefore craving is the support for existence.
다 제바 세바 시비 땡데스 다도 차베 균일레 동엘라 데워 되셰베 케니꾼라 랍도 주보 규와 티셔스.
And the commentary says, craving is a support for existence because it is from the cause that is attachment to a self that what is not pleasurable is regarded as pleasurable, and one engages in all places of birth.
다디 카리송고르 세디 다 당기 차과리 머니 신송아 유데라 되니기 세바티기 유딜렌 주고 요레스 직체 다 유데라 되니기 세바 깨고의 금진디 카레라는 디 갸브로델라 대화 통대 동의 동력이 직세디요. 세바디 치고 꿀마 당기 그래서 다 대화 통대도 동의 동력이 세바디 가진 기가 얼었어요. 아니 갸브로델라 달라 차비 차고요. 그래서 디인데다 가장어서 계시셔버려. 세바는 뭐 숨쉬지. 당부디 달라 차비 세바치. 달라 차비 세바디기 림바니바 텔라 림바니바 텔레마 용에게 림바니바 세바 림바니바 텔라 가두이나 말 대화 중나 동에 맞추나 세게 되어 세바티지. 디기 아니 유라 죽죽고요. 디기 아니 유라마다 도샤고와. 자와지 잠고 도샤고요. 자와 잠고 도샤데 아니 유 강강라 세바케바디 유텔라 죽고야. 유딜렌도야. 오도 제윤디 달라차베 차과 대화 통대도 동에 동대기 직세 아니 시방고버도 세바스. 다디 상마 세바르도. 소도 디인디 다 먼저 깨와 내야기 코르웨기 풍부를 내야기 규리파 대체마이나 상마가와 투고 투세디 세바견요 투소와 어디인디 세바 세디 아닌 것도 시베기다 요 시바 코와기에기 규조부들이 있다 세바디 시비스텐 조부들이 있습니다.
괜찮아. 걔네세 네디 아주 사적인 선마로 공부를 안 하고 여기로 어디 인지 나타다시 되기면도. So here I was asking it's saying places of birth, no? I'm not sure places is absolutely right. I think states of birth is more accurate, because here it's referring to the aggregates as states of birth, I think. Yeah, so not so much the place, but actually the state. So I'm going to change it to states of birth, wherever you find places of birth. Yeah, is that okay? Okay, so what's being said here is, wherever there is an attachment, or wherever there is craving that is directed to something, preceding that craving that is directed to that thing, before it, there is a craving for happiness and a craving for being freed from suffering. So that's like behind that. Now behind this one still, behind the craving for happiness and the craving or that wishes for happiness and the craving that wishes to abandon suffering or be freed from suffering, behind that there is a craving to the self, there is attachment to the self. So here it says, from the cause there is attachment to the self, not pleasurable is regarded as pleasurable, and here it's suggesting that that original starting point, behind it, it's kind of underlying all of this various stages, there is craving that has the self as its object and is directed at the self. From this craving for the self, you have these two forms of craving, which is craving that wishes to obtain happiness and craving that wishes to abandon suffering. So these are the craving for pleasure and craving for annihilation that come out of the craving for the self. From then this craving for pleasure and craving for annihilation, annihilation here just means to annihilate suffering, to be done away with suffering. It's commonly translated as this, I couldn't find a better term. But it basically means the wish for not having suffering. Then when there is this second kind of impulse that comes from craving towards the self, then there is the craving for existence, which is craving that is directed at various things. So whenever there is craving for existence, that is the one that is the direct kind of cause that latches on to things. That's preceded by craving for pleasure and craving for annihilation, which is then preceded by a craving for existence. So all three of these are all forms of craving. But there is a sequence in the way that they arise where the craving for the self is followed by craving for pleasure and annihilation, which is then followed by craving for existence.
Tiang zawales di seba di da siba gi tada di tamji yung de gi gyutso di ni seba yimba di gangla nga zu josarwa zawa di marangja goni kweche tiang zawales dala chakpa tangde mba simjin shingi jimemba dedu todib deba na membe ni yongsolen dungi chinji lolo da sekwa koni chingwa ni kegyu kangla demeba teni kewa megyuro shesungbi shirs.
And then so to kind of reaffirm this, we've already gone through this verse. In the commentary it says, this is explained in the root verses where it says, and these verses were the ones that we've already seen, which are, by having attachment to self, without being led by others, if one desires to gain happiness and abandon suffering, a low status is taken. Wrong perception of suffering and tightly bound desire are causes of birth. For one without them, there will be no birth.
So that sebategi ani yutela ta yutela tela jugduya yutela te lembala jugduya di sebagi cheso ta sebagi che yongdu ani sebagi kadune yaga dögür madu duga dögür marwa yaga madu duga dögür mare de ani ngaju duga di condition leptores lab keje che yongdu ani di parula chinji logulo duga di dugal mathong che di yaga la thyche pena tolo di gyubja yakbu mebala ni suzugi gyubja yakbu du sam tu ani ngue chawe jala jala khoyne beje che yodo ani gyubja yakbu meba she yodo tadi nundu khawani shembarisla na tangbo tolo le di debadi che barwa sebadi che barwa ina tolo norjo le di khari che barela na tolo norjo dame de khari che barisna chinjilo di ro che barwa dinang shin che je 당가조 풍부 le di sebagi che gore sebagi chele di 풍부 내마도 풍부 약도 담기 말해 거기 내가데 가래 풍부 내를 쳐 풍부 렘벌 주고 와. 다 야가도 누가를 바로 논두션에 담야디 가리기 제주 그래. 친줄로 제주 그래. 어디 시.
So when there is this craving for existence that then acts as the craving for a state of birth, the fact that this state of birth that one craves for is an unfavorable state of birth is because along with this craving there is wrong perception. For example, if one craves or one has this desire for clothes, the craving or the desire for the clothes is what makes you take them or buy them. But if you mistake the quality of that garment and you think that it's of good quality but then it turns out to be fake or it turns out to be badly made or a copy of something, then the wish to obtain it or that craving to possess it, so the craving for existence here, which is craving for the thing itself, that was just the reason for you purchasing it. But you purchasing a item that was not what you desire or an item that does not give you what you desire is not because of the craving itself, but when there is a mistaken understanding of that thing which you assume to be in a certain way, but then it isn't. So when it's accompanied with this wrong perception, then you end up buying something that is not actually what you wished for. So similarly, this craving for existence is just what leads you to take on new aggregates or to take on a new state of birth. But the kind of state of birth that you take, the fact that it's not a favorable one, is because it's accompanied with this wrong perception.
다 단기 배 잡은 신시하세. 다 풍불림을 배 맞아버지 가서 저기 당도 디간 배 샤비나 당부 수 달아쳐비 차고 찍체 디간에 대화 통도도 동네도 찍세 찍체 다 대화 통도기 세바 요 찍체 다 소소라 직 가르소고 글로 야고지 라바이나 대화 소르고로 기부 소르고로 돌로 사바는 가기도 와 봐 폰 사바지 라바이나 가기로 와 어디 인디 디 라바이나 초와 대화지 끼기도 와 디셈나 가와지 끼기 요바 인디 딘디기 대화디 서로 대화디 통도기 세바 디 세바 듣고니 랑체 아니 다 유텔 죽버와 유디 ngo부디 묘가 저와 땅 ngo부디 묘가 저윤디 대바 여와 성경 ngo부디 라기 말와 대바 여와 성경 ngo부디 라기 말와 땅 ngo부디 라엘라 규치 땅 보도와 무이다 도송도지 가린지 땅에 죽고도 디수 라엘 도송 땅에 죽고와 도송 땅에 죽고와 다 도송 땅에 여나야 ngobu디 소소기 고고도 좀 딱딱 라마라세디 친줄로기 조체 맞이도와 친줄로기 로트신 노르교쇼레도와 이네 ngobu디 라엘라 도송 땅에 죽고도와.
So forget for 1 second, don't think about the aggregates, think about like if you want to buy a new phone. First there is attachment to the self, then there is the attachment or the craving to the self, then there is the craving for happiness. And so the happiness here is the happiness that would arise when you have that. So when you purchase it or when you own it, there is a consequential happiness. You get it, there is a feeling of being happy when you own it. And so with that wish to be happy, which is then the craving for happiness or pleasure, then you crave for the thing that would lead to that happiness, which is the phone, for example. But when you have that craving for the phone, just having that craving doesn't guarantee that you will have it or that it will belong to you. There still needs to be something that you do. You have to do something. So you have to purchase it. You have to have something that allows you to purchase or then own that phone. Now, which phone you go towards and whether you fall prey to a scam and you buy like a fake phone or you buy a poor quality phone, that is the wrong perception. But all of these in itself are not sufficient for you to actually then become the owner of that. There is something else which you need to act through the medium of money or something that is going to give you that.
풍부디 되냐기 세발레 용두 딱 풍부디 렘발라 되바 되기 괜찮니 풍부디 링기 요르데 풍부 약도 가리 링기 요나다 풍부 퀄리티 컨디션 링기 요바데 디 링기 규치고 왔다 가서 로송다에 시고 와 로송다에 가르스네 개와 레디스다 강기 사셰 레디스다.
So there is that craving to the self, then there's craving to be happy and craving to abandon suffering, and then this makes you crave the thing that is then going to lead to this happiness. And so there's that third form of craving, which is craving towards the aggregates, which is craving for existence. These three, when these three come about, then the kind of aggregate that you take, whether it's good or it's bad, is going to be contingent on kind of like the analogous to the spending power, but another condition is required for you to be able to have a determinate kind of aggregate or not. And that spending power is then the kind of karma that one has that enables you to have one kind of an aggregate versus another.
Ta le dirwa ta dikeje sheyundu ta sonam gi le da sonam mayin be les nga keje shedu urwa giwe le de la sonam gi le mi giwe le din zolo sonam mayin be les nga keje shedu urwa so ta sonam tela sonam sadan tela ta dram de kheba yorta urwa pena nga zo pena dan kazang keje sheba na shin ni jungi samba de chanju gi samlo soba de zo gom yungdu 아니 양답이 따와기 지신지 양답이 따와기 지신지 아니 소남기 레 창조기 섬의 동료 고미야 야 동료들이 셔라기 담에들이 셔라기 지신 마토바셰네 야 창조기 섬의 동료 고미야 니 대생이 두와 베티나 신체제 가랑수 베네 기베 레도 사용두 기베 레텔라 지딘비 양답이 따와 지딘레 데베 양답이 따와 담에기 따와 깨지셰 마토나 양 가랑도 지딘 바속이 지딘비 양답이 따와기 지신네 아니 소남 사에 식당 양답이 따와기 지신 마토바시 소남기 짐바탄야라 소바든지 소남 사에 대진이 요르다.
So when we say that karma is then that kind of what enables you to have the aggregate or have what you desire, then there is a discussion of what we call virtuous and non-virtuous karma. And the way that when we're talking of virtuous and non-virtuous karma, there's another way to consider this, or what makes it virtuous or not. Actually, what kind of virtuous karma it can be, for instance, where we spoke of you can have renunciation and bodhicitta, and then you can have renunciation and bodhicitta that are accompanied with or kind of assisted by the right view. So you can cultivate states of renunciation and bodhicitta that are assisted by the view of selflessness or the view of emptiness. And then you can cultivate bodhicitta and renunciation which are not assisted by the view of emptiness. So there's a nice word in Tibetan which is tsisimpa, which is kind of, it's sustained by the power of the view of emptiness, or it's kind of infused with the view of emptiness, but it's sustained by emptiness. So you can have those kind of renunciation and bodhicitta. Similarly, when you engage in a positive or in a virtuous action, what we call a meritorious action, that merit can be, so leaving aside the view that is an otherworldly view, and by otherworldly we're comparing it with a worldly view and an otherworldly view, and otherworldly views are views that lead to liberation from existence. So not considering that, according to the worldly view itself, one can engage in virtuous actions that is accompanied with a correct worldly view, and then you can engage in virtue which is accompanied with an incorrect worldly view. There's no discussion of this view being able to lead you to liberation, of being a worldly view and therefore limited to being a worldly concern. Even within that, you can have a virtuous action that's accompanied with an accurate worldly view and an inaccurate worldly view.
So that jidembe yangdabe tawa sedu ta zo lenjele yichibi tawa dirwa ledi chena ledi dibu sangbo da lenyeba ge dibu nyeba so di yichi gi tone ani yichi tawa digi zi sinche gibe le saba ta dinde gi yichi me de bache ine ko shado shola mil jimba tanya la soba dinde gibe lo shado shola sa ro ba dinde yungo ro ta azu ni tuwa.
So when one says a correct worldly view, that correct worldly view is a conviction in the fact that certain actions will lead to certain results. So by engaging in certain virtuous actions with the conviction that these actions lead to a certain result, that's called engaging in a virtuous action that is accompanied with a correct worldly view. And so the worldly view here is conviction in the functioning of karma. Another way in which you can engage in virtuous actions is without having this conviction in the working of karma, but just do it. Like it's very common where without having a conviction in the fact that certain actions are virtuous and others are not, one just performs these actions anyway. So you can engage in virtuous action without having any firm conviction in the workings of karma.
아니 뒤쪽에 친주로 로게디 융그레스 삼로 마rum바 게디 융그레 친주로 로게디 융그레스 선놈 가주 슉체와요나 친주로 로게디 융아 다 친주로 로게 망부 융구요나 친주로 로게다 로 마rum바다 데데 망부 끼기요나 디 선놈 충중이 따르스 당가주 남유 데디직 슝나 데디직 숭그레 소다 다디셰유디 페나 대상 Arapati, Karupati, like the Chupu shooting the Yorota. Hop got then I mid Sunam Chawala, said Tapet Koroshu, Sunam Chumboresh, Chupu Shorish, somebody Yorte, in a Dindi Midigi, Samlu Nanglo, two bet in Yisha Trigi, Samlu Nanglo, Katu, Chinjulu Loganga, 간데스 지 시행로 원유 최고 간데스 지 시행 용어부 수 따고 자고 간데스 수수 파워 춤부 수고 간데스 투브제 시행고 세지다 친주로 글로냐 게데 가르치를 라바 있나 코란기 수남 사샤바 디사베 카도 데라 양타비 따웨기 지마심바티기 슈겐기다 레스 오다 디시 디지 퉁고다.
So why I'm saying this is because you find this mentioned in the texts that they speak of how when you have a strong storehouse of merit, then mistaken views reduce. You have fewer mistaken views. And if one finds that we have an abundance of mistaken views, then that's a sign that one's merit is weak or is not strong enough. And so when we see people who are extremely rich and extremely powerful and in positions of great authority, but while they are in that position where they are very rich and therefore they have an abundance of things, their view is one of wanting more, trying to find ways to accumulate more for themselves by hook or crook, doesn't matter. Finding ways to increase one's power at the expense of others' well-being, finding ways to be more influential, be more powerful, be more well-known, at the expense of other people's well-being. So despite them being very rich and well-off, from our side, when we look at them, we feel like they're very fortunate, or they must have a lot of merit because they enjoy a state of abundance. But that mental quality of an abundance, physical abundance, along with a kind of a predominance of wrong views or these kind of mistaken notions that they have, is because at the time of accumulating those causes, which might have been virtuous causes, they were accompanied with a wrong view, which is a completely worldly view, but still it was a wrong worldly view that led them to accumulate those virtuous actions, and therefore their merit, even though it results in a state of abundance, you see that there is an accompanying mental state that is not favorable, and that is contingent on how that merit was accumulated before.
다 수남 사베 카도데라 수남 대다 수남기 초 사베 카도데라 제 짐바다야로 소 수남기 초 칸디 지 사게는 디 사베 카도데라 직딘비 양태비 따와니 니부디 숭도 제제 탑시 숭디라브나시 디니 숭도 제제 수남기 초 사바이나 디 수남기 초 디기 로 마룽바 깨데바 되기 신유까지 용로 땅에 깨져 요 말에디 디로 디 수남 디기 마룽비로 그런 랑긴하게 레용해줘로 디 고급디 데스 용로 땅 거다 깨디.
So for instance, when we say method and wisdom merge and as an analogy, this is just an analogy, we're not talking about that right now. But when there is a virtue that is being engaged in, which is accompanied with the correct worldly view, we're still in the worldly view. When you have the correct view of causality and you engage in virtue, what the texts say about this leading to a lessening of wrong views or mistaken views is not the kind of antidote that you find where you analyze a view and see that the way it perceives its object is incorrect. It's not reducing wrong views in that sense by acting as an antidote to them. But what it means in the text when they say when you have an abundance of virtue, the wrong views reduce, is that the power of this virtue that is accompanied with a correct view doesn't give room for the mistaken notions to arise. It doesn't act as an antidote, but the stronger it gets, the wrong views get kind of suppressed by this intensity of virtue that is accompanied with the correct view, and it doesn't allow for them to come about. It's kind of like, I guess, health supplements or like multivitamins and minerals which make you stronger. So they make the virtuous part of it stronger, and therefore the other views reduce.
So vitamin is ya say de ba ina subunalo na za ya langju marwa ta negi shi yuna ya ne ya lang ma ju wa shi ko simde ya ju ro disoro cha.
To kind of like we're taking health supplements or these kind of palliative cures, even though you might have the base of the disease, it doesn't allow for it to come about. It kind of keeps it in check.
Sonza kadambi lama dendegi sung turbu dendinar jayayur. Ta giwe lo kadui samlo kadui tang kadui ina sudu samlo de giwe lo gal du cho de ajida. Ani kadui ina shimpeng lo ro de gala ko gom yani ke da yorwa. Ina yang gom yani ma ke ba gom yani ke je de memba chi so waten de memba chi kuro chik ede du giwe cho da samba sangpo chee shimbeng lo da dende gala kadui lo da dende gala du rangi ngangi chodo ya yungu yoba ina wata midi sonam shuji yores midi sonam shuji sa yores odi sheki yorda.
So the Kadampa Lamas, they say that if it is someone who, without kind of making an effort, so there's no kind of active effort or active meditation that's making these virtuous thoughts arise, but if someone is a person who generally has a predominance of virtuous thought, or the wish to be helpful, or the wish to benefit, or the concern for other people, such a person, if they find that these thoughts are very natural to them, then that is someone who is very fortunate or has a lot of merit.
So that dumbling di nanglo la sonam sa che ta milke de re milke wana chu longjo da de ge cha de ming da de ge thakba da cha ni kheba shu mo ko thoye yor de dinji nanglo ni tanda ngarang su de zom de nge nanglo la lo khari chi ke de no khonzo de min da lo chi ke che ta chi chilo gi ngobu kyang yang ga la samlo ma ta wa chi nang sim gyu ga la chi samlo da ye go zu ya chue che gi samlo ji kho che da ga dar kandi de di tonang ji te gu du se samlo di khoya khora odi sonam di shupsta.
So for instance, even though currently we have a lot of people who are very rich, they're very famous, they're very well known, they're influential, despite being born in a place where we have this, and we can see this, and many of us might even have such a state, the fact that we have this thought or this kind of concern has arisen in our mind, which is not just concerned with accumulating external wealth, but is also concerned with trying to do something in the sense of trying to better one's mind, or better one's way of thinking, or better one's views. And with this wish, one is now interested or intrigued in the practice of Dharma. The fact that this thought arose is also called a result of having a good amount of merit.
Ane gen chajula, gen chajula, samsung top kala gengi kenza de sungri. So zai gengi kapjila na zo bugu khashiju zinda bugu khashiju. Didi adisin zimpaji di George Bush sai. Ko da kenani kyunzo susunum shigde hakugu US gengi maji hot kal dikeji sheburdo.
So my teacher Gen Chanjula, he used to say really strange things sometimes. And one day when all of us were sitting, some of us were sitting with Gen, our students, at the time I think the president of the States was George Bush. Gen Chanjula looked at us and said, who do you think has more merit? Who has more merit? Who's more meritorious, you or Bush?
What the disudore. Tangazu, Migi will let Chesona, Migi will let Katu Sabana Tela, Chinjulogi Tawa, Tro Yebarta.
Whereas when then one engages in non-virtuous actions, a non-virtuous action necessarily is accompanied with a wrong view.
So that the Katu in the Chinjulogi, Lord Jenny, Migi will let Sayu, the Chinjulogi, Yoba Yindukana, and Migi will let the Katsu, Shukcheva Yoba, Tsugi, Tig Shukingi, and in Nazola, Chinjulogiela, Kogia, Kogop, Chumpati.
Which is why then, since non-virtuous thoughts or non-virtuous actions are always accompanied with a wrong perception or a wrong view, the result of non-virtuous actions also then creates a very fertile ground for there being an increased abundance of these wrong views.
So that Migi will let Shukchumbo, Sadeh, Midunzo, Shiga Lamodella, Tuna Shuki Gores, Tuna Tubinawa. Chinjulu lo mambu shuke to me. That the tuna decadu de la column mixigi tuna shenan sau dinde karchin di yungu or slabdi nga sasha migi le shuk migi sasha migi le de shuk chawa yudu digi tuna ge go zu res odishigi yorta.
So what they say, what you find mentioned is that people who have kind of engaged predominantly non-virtuous actions in the course of their life, when they're nearing the end, when they're nearing death, the result of this abundance of non-virtuous actions or non-virtuous thoughts, which are always accompanied with wrong views, leads to like a proliferation of all of these strange, unpleasant, mistaken notions and things that start to arise in the one's mind. For instance, they say if someone has accumulated causes for being born in like the fire hells, the strange perceptions that start to arise. So these, I guess, wrong perceptions, mistaken perceptions that start to arise at the time of death, in that case they suddenly start to perceive or start to feel really cold. So I think the way it's translated is distorted perceptions. At the time of death, they suddenly have like this increase of these strange distorted perceptions. And for instance, one of these is this feeling of cold. They start to feel extremely cold. And when this distorted perception of feeling extremely cold starts arising, what starts to appear to them as like respite from this cold is this appearance of fire. That's how it's said. And this is a sign of the state that one is going to take. And because that resultant state, which is we call the fire hell, is essentially characterized by being hot and burning consistently, when they have this distorted perception of cold or this overpowering cold sensation, and they start to have this appearance of fire, to get away from this cold sensation or from feeling like this freezing sensation, they start to have this wish to kind of be in that fire that they're seeing over there, because they want respite from where they are. And so this kind of desire for fire, as it intensifies, then that's how this non-virtuous action has led to distorted perception that then leads them in that direction, is mentioned in the texts. And there's actually, this has been attested that people actually do experience this at the time of death. So it's just not in the text. Like this is actually, you can observe it, it's happened. And in my own case, I've seen someone who kind of went through this, or was describing this as they were dying.
lungoban maden demoto dinde chawa nguna gyabde dinde chawa nanglola tongdong di kyagi yorda kyaw maso dinde kol tolo yo maso kambol yo 다돈 디기 kyagi 세지 안 치로 니마길 되는 샤오다 니마 차오 디길 샤고 what 무슨 중얼다.
So this person who I have seen, they were in South India, and at a time when it was particularly hot, to the degree where even if you were wearing just a vest, if you didn't have some sort of cooling in the house with a fan or something, you would just be covered in sweat. In that level of heat, at that temperature, this person, when they started dying, they started to feeling really cold. And they asked to be covered in clothes, which was not enough because their cold was too much. They asked to be covered in blankets. And in that temperature, when they started to still feel cold when they were covered in blankets, they asked to be put out in the afternoon sun in the middle of the heat. So like peak heat of a day, they were wearing thick clothes covered in a blanket and asked to be put out in the sun because they were freezing so much
시간 넘어들다.
at the time of death.
다들 하나씩 아주 중요한 나로라 기회를 또 전부 사대게 주죠. 아니 시간 넘어들라야 고로 튜낭 소라 오시죠. 튜낭 상부샤도야. 지게 하다 하모다 직 답이 나와든지 샤제. 딘디케지 시기다.
Whereas people who, in the text, they say people who are dying who had like an abundance of merit, they start to have distorted perceptions because they're still distorted perceptions, but their distorted perceptions are of like beautiful things. They start to see like deities or beautiful places, beautiful realms and beautiful states. That starts to appear to them.
다야 디야 무수야 루주요. 양 무수 중요한 데요. 중리 시합 자면 무수 중요한 게 중요해요.
And this is also not just in the text, but I've seen this myself.
양게 게 라마지요. 코란 샤도디. 다 코란 단다디 굴리고스요 봐. 굴리고스 타 아니 또 샤제 아니 코란다데 샵지슈딩에 디지요 가서 네오석으로 암지석으로 지기요다. 소자다 센추즈 니와 숨바다 딘디 투제 리아 시미운데 안 라마디기 코야 쪼제 라마디 코야 쪼제 다 디코쇼스 니 코가 아무지 디코야 말에 무지 샬라 쳐두면 디 무튼 땅거서 다 디고민도스 다 당연히 디 카노마도 차서 데마부 코르데샤스 말다 식수관리 되셔서 땅을 뇌 두질래서 세지 다딩가 고민 디코쇼 세지 그거는 나오듯이 시작한다.
So for instance, there was this lama who was on a drip because he couldn't eat anymore. And he had this assistant, kind of like a nurse kind of assistant. And then at like 2 at night, one day, he told his assistant, he woke up his assistant and said, take this drip off now. And so the assistant said, no, Rinpoche, you can't take the drip off, you can't eat, you need this to survive. He said, no, I don't need it anymore. There's a lot of dakinis that are here and they've come to receive me. And they've come to take me, so it's time now, I have to go take this off. Now my time to go has come. So he had that kind of vision.
So the ani dima kochu, ani Koran shabjidila, Koran yamdo mi chamba yisumjiro konzo su samaya ketang labja jab. Ani Koran ginam yu kaudo jiro, dinalo chindien yu chindien Koran sa loma rilte labja jab. Tagaran tunamo shu shawar.
So then when he took off this glucose, then he called those 2-3 people who were close to him. He gave them whatever last advice. He had this bowl with these precious substances. He ate some, passed them, distributed them, and then he went into Tugdam. So this has happened, like we've seen this.
Lama di sha che jala kudung mishe purwa, kudung shugurwa ngazo, kudung shu che, da jala kudung ma di che yundu, da rugu ngazo namju 냠냠바 좀 링세 충그레스 거 계제지요 봐. 더 링세체. 링세의 냠도 라마디 구리마도 세윤디 구리라 안데 상기기 구 여밤의 구도 입진지 여밤의 구도 입진지 구리 코로나로도 무스 디 충거르디.
Then you must be familiar with when then they cremate the kudung, which is the remains. Then after you cremate them, there's this thing where we see that certain beings, their bone, like their remains, they have this ring cell, which is like these precious things that arise, that are born. But in his case, when we took it down, his bones that were left after the cremation, they actually had the shape of Amitabha, and that's, you can still see it.
So that, and the Kuri Obama Kui Ibjing dus Kuri dus Yedeva Tigan and other things, the Chudin Shanje, that and that again. Muchi the simjung yorota tele yorta mazo the jagatu porobor to jagatu gorta.
Then this bone that had the Amitabha Buddha's kind of form on it, and that was installed in the stupa, which is in Rinpoche's room, and every now and then we go and we see it, and then we, I guess, pay respects to it.
Dia mi shamba galam ni thegyo de mare di guru di chewe khabdola 내가 칭에디 나로라 칭가 요래 칭에 좋고 요래 디르 당고마 뛰는 랑에 딩에 좋고디기 라르도시.
And this wasn't like someone told us that it's there and then later we saw the bone that someone had carved it on, when the time actually was there to pull it out of this I guess the funeral pyre or the cremation thing. Me and my friend were there and we were taking out these bones. And the one who got the bone out that had this shape of Amitabha Buddha on it was this friend of mine. We were both there taking it out ourselves. So I myself have seen this.
So the lega chingi tawa gemba tunzu yorwa. Nga zo da tidi tawa mari mi gyare. Pugul da lo chunju ra urwa tidi dabda do diyo kabirwa. Hina rinpoche ki loma yindi tidi shabji shuju rokwa che di gora di tenya la dusma. Ta kunzu ki di gora nga zo dusma tenya rokwa che di dus tenya barde.
So at the time I was not a monk, I was a lay child, I was very young, and there were senior monks who were doing this. But because we were all disciples of Rinpoche, then we were there helping, and so our job was to kind of pull the stuff out, and then these senior monks would collect it. And so in pulling it out, then we saw this ourselves.
So that di ngi tanda shogo yumzin karchilna odi she warta. Di tanda di ngi deshe gya goye di ani dungi chinju lo dangase di paru le chinju lo kigire la so so the chinju lo ke di chinju lo ke gi shugen di khani yungo islam na ani le di ni yungo yore esta dirita.
So why I'm saying all of this is because in the text where it says wrong perception of suffering, which is an accompanying condition, this wrong perception of suffering, when we're talking about wrong perception here, one understanding of this wrong perception is wrong perception of how karma works.
So that de legi, so the legi chinju lo ke la shugin shu stigi yoba yindu, ta le sangye gi topki, and chinju lo ke, and seba dini yoba yindu, and kuninyam to so na, ta tegar. So that and that sig dinang lola, sig hari labdo, keju kan la temeba, teni kewa miguros. Seba dan chinju lo ni di mesona seba ki mare kewa len tu mare ta di yesa vejala kewa le tha churda.
So when there is this karma, the intensity of karma or the kind of karma that it is has a result on the extent of the wrong perception that arises. So when there is any kind of karma and there is a corresponding wrong perception, if it is a positive karma, then there is its own corresponding wrong perception, which when they come together, there is a favorable one. If it is a negative karma or a non-virtuous karma and it is accompanied with its own corresponding wrong perception, then there is an unfavorable birth. But in general, as long as there is karma which is accompanied with a wrong perception and there is craving when these two things come together, so the wrong perception that arises from the state of the kind of karma that one has, when this wrong perception is accompanied with craving, when these two come together, then there is a necessary subsequent birth. Whereas in the last lines where it says, for one without them there will be no birth, if these two do not come together, then there is no birth. But if they do come together, then it's inevitable that there has to be birth.
Seba sum chaso ta seba sum digi nyembu tendandi nyembu tu sheche seba di ma ke yung ma dus dala chabe chakwale dewa tumde dungu tunde gi seba tele ani yutela dönye gi seba ma dus ke dorwa ta nyembu ten yudu rakwani ya tenche tangbu yula seba pa teni dewa tumde dungu tunde gi seba la nyembu ten teni dala chabe seba la nyembu tembe kadula dus rimba ya dusin tenwa.
So this was the process where they start from craving to self, craving to pleasure and annihilation, and then craving towards things, or if it's talking about birth, then states. And so the way in which it arises is starting from craving to self, then pleasure and annihilation, and then things. But in the way that one applies the antidotes that one applies start from the third, which is craving to things, then the antidote to craving to pleasure and craving for annihilation, and then the antidote, the last antidote that one applies in terms of the order, the last one is craving to self.
So that yul seba degi nyembu tembe khadu tela ani yuteda dungi gi ten yibo ko mer chikche.
As an antidote to the craving for things, the antidote is reflecting on the nature of suffering of things, or reflecting on how the things act as a cause for suffering or are the basis of suffering.
다 동행 댄스 하고 봐. 딜람네 하고도. 동행 댄라네 풍부들이 하고도 와 디마치브체. 유를 세바 빵 윤도 다 간다 서로가 대화직 차제. 응 서로가 대화직 뇨. 다디 냐마 디체네가 기부슈 총소. 디산네가 기부슈 총소. 디체네 기부 총소 세게 유텔라 라리양 유텔라 주닉 두바케도도 아니 유텔라 때네 대화 디 중구 요바 윤도 유텔라 양자 주닉 두바케도도 아니 유텔라 때네 동해야 용구 요레세 삼바티.
So if we say that, there might be just reconsider this, because when we say it is a base for suffering, there might be a way, we might understand that as if it's the aggregates, because we've been calling the aggregates the basis of suffering or the support for suffering. So don't consider it like that. When we say the object is the base for suffering, what we mean here is from that object we have a resultant state of pleasure. But the more we receive pleasure from this object, it automatically leads to a kind of further wish to receive more pleasure, because one is never really satisfied. And so because there is no state of contentment that arises from things, and when we experience pleasure from things, this continuously increases in a kind of unquenchable way our desire towards things. Then we see things as a basis, in the sense that that is the reason why we have this resultant desire, that then becomes this kind of chain where we are unable to ever be content, and that progressively makes it harder. And so in that sense it is a base for suffering.
So the yutela se ne tuning dumbake dudu yutel lambal jugu dudu samle nanglo la yute tachik dunga zola dewi gyuchigu samlo ro kwaje ta tele dewa chigu ma jungme so do samlo kwaje ngazo dumbake do echi yorwa. So that they di indu di maritas di yudi digi 그러나 대외견 쉐바는 냠도 동의기 견 쉐고 텔라된 동의 징기리 에세지 디 사모타나 유를 세바다 고엘 팽고르다.
So normally when things make us happy, that resultant happiness has this ability to kind of conceal other features that it has, and in concealing or hiding these other aspects, and you just focus on that positive one, you forget to see that it actually has other qualities or other aspects that are also detrimental to one's well-being. And so in this first phase, what is being said is that instead of fixating on things as if they were solely a source of happiness, understand that while they might lead to states of happiness as well, they are also causes of suffering. And so that kind of reflection then acts as an antidote to this third level of craving, which is directed at objects.
세바 니베디 대화 통도기 세바도 대화 통도도 동의 동도기 세바세 세바 텔은 님보 땡디 다 대화 통도기 세바세 다 조디 서로가 대화지 서로가 대화디 인데 서로가 대화지 단당가서 지루기 유일라 대응하라 소발라 땡체 단다 서로가 대화지 게인데 디 서로가 대화디 간조라 아니 가뒤나다 오늘 거랑이 소속이 되는 예제 조기 대화배 양탑이 대화 이미 서로 오신 가지고 로 차고 오르고 이는 코랑 디 대화 코랑이야 간다 대응 오월 무투니 네 무투진 네게 고감매야 돼 간다 그 귤구고요다 단다 내가 지놓고 대응 오월 모두 주버려 돼 간다 대응 오월 무투지 그 네매 돼 코랑랑 신코랑 대화 모임이 오월 파 귤구고요 랑신디 셰베이나 아니 모두 규등이 소와 대화 대다 텔라 샤비 차고 될래야 디 가야라 디기 삼로디 팽고를 셔버.
And so then what is said is, so that's the first level of craving, which is the one for existence, which is things or states. Then the next level of craving, which is craving for pleasure or craving for annihilation, this is primarily dealing with the pleasant sensation itself. So not the thing that leads to the sensation, but the pleasant feeling itself, or the feeling of pleasure or happiness. And here, when there is a feeling of pleasure or happiness, it's accompanied with this kind of assumption in the sense it's very innate, but you feel like this is now really happiness, or this is kind of like a very satisfying or a very stable form of happiness. And so with the satisfactory nature that this happiness has, it then leads to wanting it and craving it further. And so, as an antidote to this craving, which is craving for happiness, which arises because we see this happiness as a kind of real form of happiness or as a satisfactory form of happiness, as an antidote to this, reflecting on the fact that even though it is there for a while, it is not really satisfactory or it is not really real, because at some point, its nature itself is going to transform into a state of no longer being happy. And so while it's there, it might feel happy, but its nature is to not be able to sustain that quality that it has, and at some point transform into something else. That's the nature while it's there. And so while you're experiencing happiness, reflecting on this quality of it is described as being helpful as an antidote to reduce that level of craving.
미직 야고슈 통한샤 미들라 가와슈 게베이나 미들슈 가치메이나 아니 수수 조보지 지시야지 nga middle shuj gaso kaisa kope mid shiga da yang shuj dos lan jig legurwa la du gana o ta ko den de yor ta ko nima jig on de yore nima jig le ko pet ko shiga pet do shoresta pet judu rest 단다 통데 시가 잠게 딱딱 지그래서 코 템부제 민도스 니마지 원들이 통거리 니마지 내리 차르고도 라바 있나 대마다 가르치 대마다 아니 미들 따당 주고로 셔 단기 로이 가와든 섬어 유당 로시로 봐 디소로 시고르다 먼저 단다 서로 대화 톰드세 서로 대화들 따당 간디르나 딘디소 따당 디소로 지여 봐다 디기 랑신디 신바이나 디 단기 라오나시 내가 찍을데 이모질 내가 찍을 코 유중에 들었어 라바 있나 안 랑신이 코딜라 따당 주고 가지고.
For example, if you have someone who we really like, we meet someone who's really pleasant or very lovely to be around, and then we're telling our friends saying, oh, I met this person, they're really lovely, they're so great, they're really nice to be around, they're very kind. And then suddenly our friend or someone we know tells them, yeah, that's true, they are like that, but they're not really stable, because another day if you meet them, they'll suddenly change and they'll be in a different mood. And in that state, they're really weird and unpredictable, and you can't really trust what they're going to do. The second you hear this, your attitude immediately changes towards them, and that initial kind of feeling of fondness for them, or that feeling of considering them to be really great people or really great, it suddenly gets like that armor gets pierced. And so similarly, the same if you manage to see that the nature of that person is not stable in giving you that behavior consistently. And then, so this is an example when you understand the same thing with pleasurable feelings, which when you look at their nature, even though every now and then they come about and they're very pleasant and they make you feel great, the nature of that thing itself is not stable, and suddenly that same feeling can transform into something else. And that same feeling can become now diametrically opposite to what was making you feel good and transform into something else. If you reflect on it in a similar way, then that complete reliance on that pleasurable feeling or that feeling of joy that one experiences now and then, that reliance on it reduces.
다 차고 숨버들이 다 달라 차베기 님보텔라 다음에바 마통게바도 콜 차바 가야 답시 셴바 가야요 말다.
And then there's a third level of craving which is directed at the self. And to remove this level of craving, there is no antidote other than realizing selflessness. So that's how the various antidotes for these three kinds of craving are described. So these first two kinds of antidotes aren't really able to remove them. They're called antidotes that suppress, that just temporarily keep them in check. They suppress those two forms of craving, but they aren't really antidotes that can eradicate that kind of craving.
That's zawadine. Wana marikbada lejan nyelengi pungbu gyuma innam siichri seba chubu gyurtens. Tab marikba, thoma marikba di pungbu gyuma ribes, kowa gyawa lemba gyuma ribes. Taana shingi nipa dujigi le sasha ba tenya nyelengi pungbu gyuma ribes. Ani karchini thanda kabdes kowa gyawa lemba gyudile seba chubu dishe karchin gyabares. Misi goba ke yorubes, dunzen ke yorubes, chiwa tangbar.
Then there's a question, the text carries on. It says, one may ask, are ignorance and karma also not the cause of the aggregates? Why is it that only craving has been mentioned here? So the question is, normally we speak of ignorance and karma also being the causes of the aggregates. How is it that here only craving is being mentioned?
Mississippi Guinia Major, Seba Nyesheba, Guni Pembe Checherdang, Temataji Legami, Tuna Mechiros, or the Lenticumber.
How do you pronounce this word that I've written? Even though what? Nescience? How's it pronounced? Huh? No. Nescience? Who's from England? You're from England. How do you pronounce it? Nescience? Nescience? Is that a word? No? Nescience? With sh? Okay. The answer is, even though nescience, I'm trusting you, even though nescience is the cause of existence, it is not mentioned and instead only craving is. This is because it impels a continuity and is the immediate cause. Nor is karma mentioned because if it exists, that does not have to exist.
But de la Karshere, Dembares, Mishiba Sag, Toma Marigba di, Koa Geval and Bigula Yorede, in a Tanda de Nigi Mashe Gumzin Karislamna, the Koa Geval and Rimi Kutres.
So here the answer is, it's true, what you're saying is true. Nescience, which is another way of describing ignorance, is the cause of existence. But the reason why it's not mentioned here is because nescience is a very distant cause of existence. So distant here means that it is not a direct cause, but it is an indirect cause because it is the cause of a cause of a cause of a cause. So nescience is very distant or an indirect cause.
Seba yona legi kowa kigire seba meba soyashana le yona yon kowa ke tugu yomare di indi kowa kewa ne gyutso di le chaga yomare dichini le majoba yins.
And then the second one, which is, it's true even karma is a cause of existence, but here it's not been mentioned because it's not the main cause of existence. The main cause of existence is not karma, because if there is karma but there is no craving, that karma doesn't have any more the ability to produce birth and therefore existence. And so the reason why it's not mentioned here is because by itself, without being accompanied by craving, it is not a cause for existence. Therefore, it's not the main cause of existence, which is why karma here has not been mentioned.
Seba gyutso yimbi gyumzen kare lamna seba ni gyursheba ni sebe sibi günkulshin pember chebe chirda seba temata duba chebe ches gyumzen ni gitone.
And so only craving has been mentioned as a cause because it does two things. It incites and impels, which means it kind of incites over here. I've tried to use it as a word to suggest that it makes it stronger, and then impels is, after having made it stronger, it's the one that pushes you in that direction. It does both. That's one quality that it has. And the other quality that it has is, because it is the immediate cause of existence, it completes it. So only craving has been mentioned as a cause because it incites or intensifies and then impels the continuing of existence, which then immediately completes existence. So there's two reasons why craving has been mentioned.
Seba degi sibi gyunkulgi reyase, gyunkushi pemberchigi reyase, di kowa nanglo la, kari yorisla na, seba chosu yona, len nipa tujin kyuriya. Seba di cheba yina, ani namshi di kewa lemba lo ngundu chodo ya. Seba yona, le saba saado ya, kewa lemba le saba saado ya. Di tsangwa sebe gi chegi yuba indu, seba sayadi kari re, ani di res, sibi gyunkushi pemberchigi res.
So again, this incite and impel has the meaning of, what it means is when there is craving, it intensifies existing karma, which is why then the consciousness gets pushed forward, or the consciousness then is propelled forward into a state, or onto something. And at the same time, it also incites in the sense that it makes you accumulate new karma or makes you perform new actions. So by intensifying pre-existing actions, which then move the consciousness towards something on the one hand, and then while doing that, it also makes you accumulate new actions or perform new actions, is the two meanings that one can think of when one is talking about how it incites and impels.
Dire, ta di indu seba di phungbu lembi gyu zo yin ta di ngazo phungbu lembi gyu zo di seba yin phungbu di ani ngarang zo gi ta dungye she mangbu she de changma ta kyega na ji la so dungye changma gi ten di che so kyega na ji la so dungye changma yungye gi ten di phungbu di che phungbu di len chungi gyu zo di seba indu seba gar cha bare dungye thamji gi gyu zo di seba re so di she.
So craving is that immediate cause that leads you to have the aggregates. And because the aggregates, like we saw earlier, are the base for experiencing all suffering, which is birth, aging, sickness, and death. So whatever suffering is experienced on the base of the aggregates, or the aggregates support the experience of all suffering. And because craving is the cause that leads you to take on the aggregates or to have the aggregates, craving is said to be the cause of all suffering in that sense.
Dire, ta dungye gi gyu zo yinde islam na, ta da gyumjin sumbu di samadang. Seba gi le nyuba tujin tangda, seba yoba di gi le nyuba tujin tangya, seba yoba di gi kewa le malongo do choro ya, tangi keja she yamba, sidu gyuyin slaya di kewa le malongo do choro ya, seba yona, ani kewa le le sabu so ya, ta dinzu samadang je, ani seba saya di nyamon thamje gi na ni, seba saya di dungye gi gyu zo re, so da di samadang.
So if you want to use like a reason to say craving is the main cause, then the reasons that you say is because it has this action of intensifying or inciting pre-existing karma, propelling that action or propelling the mind into the direction, and then also newly accumulating actions, which are then the result for the aggregates to experience all of this. You use that as a reason. So the three reasons you can give are because it incites, impels, and within that you can think of what it does to pre-existing karma and how it accumulates newly. And then you use that as a reason to say craving is the main cause of suffering.
Ta seba tenyang dadu tawa marikba yuna yejing. Mena maybe cheers marikba ani dungye gi gyu zawa yimbas. Ta seba tenyang dadu tawa marikba yuna yejing mena meba su doji gyu cheba cher ta. Seba doji gyu cheba jende karela na marikba dires. Veswa di indu dungye thamji gi gyu zo di karelisha seba redus she. Seba di marikba yuna yejing mena dodu gu yoba indu ani seba doji gi gyu cheba jende marikba chadu di marikba di kari chare dungye thamji gi gyu seba gi zawa indu dungye gi zawas dungil gi gyus yawa ni cherota.
Then it says also, this is all there in the text by the way. Then it says craving exists if there is ignorance that views a self and does not exist if this ignorance does not. And so here craving is the main cause of suffering. But then after seeing what craving being the main cause of suffering for these reasons that we've just said, craving itself is observed to exist only if there is ignorance that views a self, and in the absence of such ignorance that views a self, craving does not exist. And so ignorance that views a self is the indispensable cause of craving. If there is craving, then you have all of the other aggregates that arise, which is the nature of suffering. And so craving is the main cause of suffering, but then the source of craving or the root of craving is ignorance. And so ignorance is the root of suffering is understood in this way, and also ignorance being the cause of suffering is understood in this way. So there's two ways. One is ignorance is the root of suffering, because it is the root or the indispensable cause of craving then, which is the main cause of suffering. And then it is the cause of suffering because ignorance leads to craving, and craving then leads to that other entire process.
두슬람나 둥이기 규당 둥이기 자와 카가체.
So we have to separate between the cause of suffering and the root of suffering.
둥일기 규 세바레 둥일기 자와 마릭바레스.
So then, strictly speaking, when we say cause of suffering, it refers to craving, and when we say the root of suffering, it is ignorance.
두스 카가체. 그래서
So separate them like this.
다 마릭바데라 둥이기 지당 마릭바 둥이기 규 레디네 단다 둥이기 규세 둥이기 규 조고 계제시도 마릭바 마셰에 당기라야 돼. 미시시비 규이에 마주에서 디기 셰자로와. 소소 두스셰제 간다 둥이기 규 둥이기 자와. 소소 다 둥이기 자와 라이디 컨디션 차바르라나. 둥이 탐주 윤석의 규 조디 세바체. 다 세바 인도 간라 아니 세바 도지기 규 카레샤. 세바 도지기 규 쳬바진 카레샤. 세바 도지기 규 쳬버진디 마릭바레도스 마릭바여나 코여바 마릭바메나 코메바스 당기 계제셰기 도지기 규 쳬바진 코와디 디여나 디중 디메나 디케비 디케치슬라이기 도지기 규 쳬바진 코와디 계제셰로와 디셰로바 인도 간라 아니 둥이기 자와디 마릭바레도스 디직소와 디코로와 다 딜라바 디게 nganzu shugla khari tendorilana shugla khari khodorilana ani marikba dojegi nyembo kha yimba di seba dojegi nyembo yimba ta seba ponjegi lamdi marikba dojegi nyembo tekhona mado mindu usedi shugi nganzu di tengi.
So like in the first line it says, even though nescience is the cause of existence, you can consider ignorance the cause of existence. It's fine. But here when we're talking about cause, we're talking about it in a slightly more strict or a more specific way, where the cause is craving, because it's the main thing. Nescience is not mentioned as a cause here because we said it's not the direct cause, or it's not immediately the one that makes it happen. So when we're using the term cause or root, we're saying the cause is the one that immediately makes it happen, and that's craving. But when you then look at craving itself, the indispensable cause which necessitates craving, which requires craving necessarily to come about, and without which there is no room for craving to come about. When we start looking at what is indispensable for craving to arise, which means if that thing is there, craving will arise, and if that is not there, craving does not arise, then we find that that is ignorance, and that's why we call it the root. Now, while we say this and we start understanding that ignorance is the indispensable cause of craving, implicitly what starts to become clear is that whatever therefore is an antidote that one is looking for to be an antidote for craving is going to have to be the antidote for ignorance. And whatever is an antidote for ignorance will act as an antidote for craving, because one is indispensable for the existence of the other. So what implicitly becomes clear as a result of this way of understanding or this way of verifying this causal process is that if ignorance is indispensable for craving, only the antidote to ignorance is going to have the ability to counter craving, and nothing else will work. So that is kind of like an implicit thing that becomes clear.
So the indu mena mebichir maribo dungi gyu zawa yimba shena sekbo ponjege lamla mimongbo gyuros.
Which is why in the commentary it says, craving exists if there is ignorance that views a self, and does not exist if this ignorance does not. By understanding that ignorance is the root of suffering, one will not be mistaken in knowing the path that abandons craving.
Ta dinashi tanda de dungi gi gyu dungi zawa laba nashi changju chumbu gi gyu namchin gi gyu changju chumbu gi zawa changju gi zawa changju gi gyu dela yang gyu de zawa khaga che.
Similarly, when we talk about Buddhahood or great liberation, which is another way of talking about great Buddhahood, of Buddhahood, then even for Buddhahood there is a cause of Buddhahood and there is a root of Buddhahood. So there's a distinction there as well between cause and root.
So namchin tunyi lo jangye ji yimba yina namchin gi gyu zo khares digmen ji che ani di gita doji gi gyu cheba jin khare dinde gi gyu zo wo di doji gi gyu cheba jin khare khari yona yo gang yona yo ba da gang mena ko mi jung wa zawa de khare sha doji gi gyu cheba jin ngö sun to na di ani namchin gi zawa changju bi zawa changju gu use od strong orta.
So similarly for Buddhahood, what is the main cause of Buddhahood? And then what is an indispensable cause of that main cause, which then leads to understand the root of Buddhahood, which is something that if you have that, then you will have the cause of Buddhahood, and if you don't have that, then you will not have the cause for attaining Buddhahood. And so you can identify that as well. Yeah.